In a small African village, John Okoye, a 32-year-old handsome man, lived a simple but content life with his beloved wife, Ada. They were known for their deep bond, always seen together, and their love was the envy of many. One fateful morning, Ada suddenly fell ill. Despite all efforts to save her, she passed away mysteriously, leaving John devastated. Her death came without warning, and grief consumed him. John was a broken man, left to mourn the love of his life. However, just a few months after Ada's passing, John's life took an unexpected turn. His once humble home, a small clay house, was replaced by a grand mansion that stood out in the village. His wardrobe changed from simple clothing to extravagant fabrics of silk and gold. His wealth was nothing short of a miracle. John, who once struggled to make ends meet, now lived in luxury. The villagers couldn't believe what they were seeing. How could John, who had always been modest, suddenly become one of the richest men in the land? Rumors quickly began to spread. Whispers filled the air, with people suggesting that John had used Ada in a dark ritual to gain his wealth. Friends who once stood by him began to distance themselves. Strangers eyed him with suspicion, and even his closest confidants were unsure. His sudden wealth, once admired, now became the subject of fear and doubt. The more John tried to explain his success as a blessing, the more the rumors grew. People talked about secret dealings, rituals, and sacrifices. John's name was no longer spoken with respect but with fear. The village elders, who were the moral and spiritual guides, could no longer ignore the suspicion surrounding John. They called him to appear before them. Sitting in front of the stern council of elders, John's heart pounded. He was a proud man, but the weight of the accusations pressed heavily on him. The elders asked him to explain his sudden fortune, and John, with all sincerity, denied any wrongdoing. He told them that his wealth came from a business opportunity, one that he had been fortunate enough to seize after Ada's death. He had invested wisely and was now reaping the rewards. His voice was filled with emotion as he spoke of his love for Ada, denying any involvement in rituals. But the elders were not easily convinced. His story seemed too convenient. How could a man's fortune change so drastically after such a tragic loss? Despite John's impassioned plea, the elders decided to investigate further. Unknown to John, they sought the help of a renowned spiritual investigator from a neighboring village. This investigator, a man known for uncovering hidden truths, was tasked with finding the root of John's wealth. The investigation began quietly, but what the investigator found shocked the village. Hidden within John's new mansion were symbols, ancient, powerful symbols that were linked to old, dark rituals. These symbols were hidden in places that John had never noticed. But to the investigator, they were clear signs of ritualistic practices. The discovery of these symbols was enough to turn the village entirely against John. His wealth, which had already been viewed with suspicion, was now considered cursed. The people believed that Ada's life had been traded for John's fortune. His denials grew weaker as more evidence came to light. Testimonies from people who claimed they had seen John engaging in strange practices began to emerge. A neighbor claimed to have seen him speaking to himself late at night by the river, a place known for spiritual rituals. John, once confident in his innocence, now felt the walls closing in. As the investigation deepened, John's world fell apart. He was arrested and taken into custody. The village that once admired him now saw him as a monster. He was brought to trial, where more damning evidence was presented. The village elders, sitting as judges, listened to testimonies and examined the findings of the spiritual investigator. John stood in the center of the court, surrounded by people who once called him a friend but now looked at him with contempt. His heart sank deeper with every accusation. No one believed him anymore. He stood alone, fighting for his life. In a shocking turn of events, John broke down during the trial. His voice, once firm, cracked with emotion as he confessed. He admitted that, in his desperation to escape poverty, he had turned to dark forces. He had made a pact, but it wasn't supposed to involve Ada's life. He didn't know that her death would be part of the deal. His wealth, which had once brought him joy, was now revealed to be the result of a curse. Tears streamed down his face as he begged for forgiveness, not just from the village, but from Ada's memory. He claimed he had no idea the cost would be so high, and now, he was paying the ultimate price. The village elders, after hearing John's confession, had no choice but to pass their judgment. John was sentenced to death for his involvement in the dark arts. His wealth, once the symbol of his success, had become his downfall. As he was led away to face his fate, the village stood in silence. There was no celebration of justice, only a quiet understanding that greed and the lust for power had destroyed a man who once had everything: love, respect, and a good name. John spent his final days in a prison cell, reflecting on his choices. He realized too late that the wealth he had gained had cost him everything that truly mattered. He had lost his wife, his dignity, and now, his life. The mansion that had once stood as a symbol of his success was now empty, a hollow reminder of the consequences of his greed. The villagers mourned for Ada, but they also mourned for John, a man who had been consumed by his desire for riches. On the day of his execution, the entire village gathered. But unlike the day of his arrest, there were no jeers or cries for justice. Instead, the people stood in silence, watching as John was led to the platform. His face, once full of pride, was now a picture of sorrow and regret. The sun set slowly behind him, casting long shadows over the village as he faced his end. John's story became a legend in the village, a cautionary tale told to future generations about the dangers of greed and the pursuit of wealth without integrity. It was a story of love lost, choices made, and the heavy price paid for power. In the end, the village learned that true wealth is not measured in gold, but in love, honor, and the choices one makes when faced with temptation.